Running back, my favorite position in football. I've been watching the NFL since the 70s. Over the years, I've seen some of the greatest runners of all time do some of the greatest things. Now, the game has changed, at times asking more and more from running backs as the main offensive weapon. But most recently, the last, say, 5 to 10 years, it's asking them to step down into a more tactical role rather than being the center of the offensive strategy. This is obviously because the passing game has taken off. That said, I believe we're going to see a renewed focus on running backs in the coming years, especially as teams begin to accept the fact that they don't all have a top 5 quarterback. You can check my math, but only 5 teams have a top 5 QB. The rest will have to stop overpaying for mid-level QBs and establish a well-supported run game. This is not to say we're going to go back to the glory days of running backs from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but their importance will be more fully realized. With this in mind, I took time to reflect on the greatest running backs to have ever stepped on the gridiron and acknowledge all they've done for their teams, the fans, and the game. To this end, I'm facing the question, who's the greatest running back of all time? It's a topic of some interest to many and great interest to some. It's something that I think about a lot. Typically, this comes down to a 3-man conversation, but there are those who argue there's a 4th running back who ought to be included. I agree. So, I asked myself, who else has a claim to at least be mentioned in the GOAT running back conversation? To sort it out, I decided to go big. I evaluated 40 of the top running backs going all the way back to the 1950s. I stopped at 40 because a lot of backs started to look samey, with careers that resembled a bunch of others. There didn't seem to be much value in pressing on, and frankly, I was mentally done with crunching all the numbers. So 40 is enough for now. It's important to note, I'm not simply looking at ring counts, career stats, records, or a checklist of skills. I'm looking at all of the above and breaking it all down in 5 fact-based, data-driven categories, presented as a video series, rather than a long single video. I've got lots to say, and I can get pretty long-winded, so a full-length video would be way too much. All 5 videos are posted with the links in the description. You don't have to wait, jump right in and check them all out. Now, mind you, I'm not claiming that this is the definitive analysis for establishing the GOAT running back. It's one man's take, and you know the old saying, every asshole has an opinion, or something like that. Well, here's mine. And while I'm at it, I hope to bring something a little different to the discussion, attempting to make this as objective as possible, with analysis, rationale, and justifications. It's not perfect, so I welcome your feedback along the way, which I'm sure will be given in the most respectful and constructive ways. So, without further ado, here's the breakdown on the madness of my method. Starting out is the primer. In this section, I explain the background for the analysis and the methodology used. Each video has an intro, but you can refer back to this section as a refresher on the details. First, we look at who's in the analysis. 40 of the top running backs from throughout history, each with a significant portion of his career peak occurring after 1960. More on that in a moment. Pause the video, look over the list. If you think someone's missing, let me know in the comments. I want to give all backs due respect, so if anyone is missing, it's not meant to be a slight. Running backs with fewer than 5 seasons as a primary starter are not included. In my view, it's just not enough to assess and really be a part of that all-time great conversation. Also, guys like Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, Christian McCaffrey, among others, will be added down the road when their careers come to a close. Next, let's go over what's in the analysis. 5 categories that weigh specific criteria to help us determine who is the greatest. These categories are accomplishments, longevity, individual performance, impact, and the eye test. Again, pause here, read through the descriptions, but I'll elaborate more in later videos when we come to each topic. I also need to take a moment to give a special shout out to Danger Productions. That channel had an excellent NBA GOAT video, which served as a strong inspiration for the 5 categories I'm using. His video is a few years old at this point, but it still holds up pretty good. The link's in the description. Go check it out. You'll love it. Okay, moving on. Next, where is the information gathered from for this analysis? ProFootballReference.com is the single source of truth that I'm using for NFL stats. This excludes any third-party analytics such as QBR. I'm not using some podcast extrapolations, PFF grades, or Football Outsiders ratings. This analysis itself is producing ratings, so I don't want to build ratings on top of ratings. I'm also working off of the actual game film taken from YouTube, even for games I've already seen over the years, and no highlight reels. Of course, I use highlight clips to help make these videos, but not for the analysis. There's loads of full game videos and game digests that present 15 to 30 minutes of key plays. This is way more useful than just highlight clips. You get a fuller context of the plays and their importance. It also gives a more complete picture of how the running back's performance impacted the game. The eras from when the running backs were selected goes back to the late 50s. I set that as the boundary because the 50s was a watershed decade for the NFL. That subject could be a video all by itself, but the main points are shown here. Based on this scope, the first running back that falls within the boundaries is Lenny Moore. He entered the league in 1956, and his career peak continued until 1965. This gives, in my opinion, enough game footage after 1960 to assess Moore's performances and include him in the analysis. Why am I doing this analysis in this way rather than just giving out my opinion? As I alluded to earlier, I'm attempting to provide a more balanced, data-driven analysis. On that point, if you see anything problematic with the categories or criteria, let me know. I'm eager to make improvements where I can. Maybe I've overvalued something or didn't factor something else you think is important. Let me know your thoughts. Finally, how will I pull all this off? I will be rating the running backs in each category, then ranking them in order 1 through 40 based on those ratings. The ratings themselves are made up using 115 different stats, a few custom analytics, and hundreds of hours of game film stretching across 6 decades of football. Each running back is ranked in each category. Each ranking value equals 1 point. For example, 6th place equals 6 points, 28th place equals 28 points, and so on. The ranking points are then added together to make a final rating. Then these final ratings are compared golf style, meaning the lower the better. All right. That wraps up the primer. From here on, all questions must be submitted in writing. Okay? On to the analysis. First up, Volume 1, Accomplishments. We'll start with a quick look at the criteria. Transparency is important, so I want you to know how the ratings are determined. I'm only using the most prestigious and long-lasting awards and achievements that are recognized by the NFL. These are won during the regular season or as part of the annual NFL Honors event. I've limited to accolades that a running back can earn every season, so several notable awards aren't included, such as Rookie of the Year, Hall of Fame All-Decade teams, as well as a few others. And finally, I'm adding up each player's total accomplishments, along with his MVP voting shares, if any, as the means to rate them in order. I've also valued conference championships at 20% of winning the Super Bowl. This means 4 Super Bowl losses don't quite amount to 1 Super Bowl win. I'm sure at least one fan base understands this. A quick tabulation gives us the top 10 most accomplished running backs in NFL history. This is the next 15, 11 through 25, and the rest, 26 through 40. Looking at the top 10, it's easy to see Jim Brown dominates this category in the same way he dominated his era. Quite frankly, he's perhaps the most dominant player of all time, which is the reason accomplishments is an important part of the GOAT analysis. It tells us how insiders and professional observers regarded the running backs during their playing days. It's a reflection of both longevity and peak. And in the end, we get a clear picture of how dominant the players were during their respective eras as a means to compare them across eras. Jim Brown's sheer volume of accomplishments is even more impressive when you consider that he played in only 9 seasons. While that's by no means short, it's one of the shorter tenures amongst running backs on this list. Yet his numbers were so far ahead of everyone else. You need to add the totals from the number 2 guy, Barry Sanders, with MVP running back Shaun Alexander in order to match Brown's tally. It takes the Chicago Bears' top 2 running backs all time, Walter Payton and Gale Sayers, to stack up to Brown's results. The combination of LaDainian Tomlinson and Adrian Peterson actually comes up short of Brown's total. The Associated Press MVP started in 1957. Well, guess who won it? Jim Brown. Only rookie in NFL history to do so. On top of that, he's the only running back, actually the only non-quarterback, to win the MVP more than once. This includes back-to-back awards in his rookie and sophomore seasons. In total, he won the MVP 3 times. This ties him with the likes of legendary quarterbacks Johnny Unitas, Brett Favre, and Tom Brady. His third MVP came in his final season, demonstrating that he was still playing at an apex peak level at retirement. This serves as the basis for using Jim Brown's career as a benchmark for measuring all the backs in this analysis. In later categories, we'll look at how running backs stack up to each other across a 9-season career peak. I'll get into that more in the performance and impact videos, so stay tuned. For Brown, beyond his 3 MVPs, he attained a ridiculous number of awards and achievements, including 9 Pro Bowls, 8 first-team All-Pro selections, 8 Jim Brown Awards, formerly known as simply the rushing title, but since he hogged all those accolades during his career, the NFL honored him by naming the achievement after him. And finally, he and the Cleveland Browns won an NFL championship in 1964. The Offensive Player of the Year award didn't exist when he played, but if it did, there's a good chance he'd have gathered at least 3 more accomplishments. He was simply way ahead of his time, and his volume of accolades are a reflection of that. Next, we take a look at Barry Sanders. Like Jim Brown, he accomplished a great deal despite an early retirement where he clearly had lots left in the tank. He played in the Pro Bowl all 10 seasons of his career, the most by any running back in NFL history, was named first-team All-Pro 6 times, the second most among running backs, second only to Jim Brown, earned 4 Jim Brown Awards, was 2-time Offensive Player of the Year, and won the 1997 League MVP. Though the 97 award was a co-MVP with Brett Favre, I'm comfortable saying out loud that Barry Sanders is the real MVP. He captured all the secondary MVPs, which included the Pro Football Writers Association MVP, Newspaper Enterprise Association MVP, and the Sporting News Player of the Year. All of these secondary awards are usually, not always, but usually won by the same player each season. So, since Barry won all of those, it means for 1997, he's the guy. He's securely in the number 2 spot for this category. Then after him, it's really no surprise to see Emmitt Smith, Walter Payton, and O.J. Simpson rounding out the top 5 spots. At this point, I also want to acknowledge Earl Campbell for landing in the top 10 for this category, despite having an injury-shortened career. He played in only 8 seasons, which is the shortest among anyone in the top 10. However, he really only had 6 fully healthy seasons to rack up the accolades. In those 6 seasons, Campbell won Offensive Player of the Year 3 times, tied for the most with Marshall Faulk, earned an MVP in his second season, received 3 first-team All-Pro selections, went to the Pro Bowl 5 times, captured 3 rushing titles, and accumulated the 3rd most MVP voting shares amongst running backs. He took the league by storm from day one, playing with an explosive, hard-hitting style that earned him Rookie of the Year. In 1980, he was 1 injury-missed game away from being the 2nd running back in history to gain over 2,000 yards in a season. Interestingly, he's the only running back in NFL history to have a season total between 1,900 and 2,000 yards. I'm not sure if that means anything. I just thought it was interesting. Campbell seemed to be an unstoppable force as he dominated the league for his first 3 seasons. But ironically, the same bruising running style that earned him all those accolades resulted in the wear and tear that brought an early end to his career. Another point to highlight for this category is that there were quite a few running backs who had trouble accumulating accomplishments because the competition during their era was so steep. This is most relevant in the late 90s, early 2000s, when this list of running backs, a dozen in total, all had careers with significant overlap. Even several backs not listed, like Warrick Dunn, his teammate Mike Allstott, and Steven Jackson played within this period, competing for Pro Bowl and All-Pro spots. Some extremely talented running backs wound up with very few awards. On the short list were the likes of Eddie George, Jamal Lewis, and Fred Taylor. This is because they were either splitting recognition with each other, Ann Priest Holmes, Shaun Alexander, and Edgerrin James, or falling behind top running backs, namely Terrell Davis, LaDainian Tomlinson, and Marshall Faulk. It was an incredible era, perhaps the last great era of the running back compared to today's pass-centric league. I'm hoping there's more of this stuff in the future. So there it is. We got through the first video. Before we close and go on to the next one, let me know if you have any feedback. I want to know if you found this interesting or informative, or if you have any thoughts about the results, the process, or any part of my ramblings. Click the like button, subscribe if you're into that sort of thing, share this video with friends, and know that Jim Brown is the most accomplished running back in the history of the NFL. Says me. Next stop, Volume 2, Longevity. See you there.